It was the kind of rental listing that made Alex feel like he'd finally caught a break. After weeks of scrolling through overpriced, poorly maintained apartments around the Toronto suburbs, he found a 2-bedroom basement suite for just $850 a month. The ad mentioned fresh renovations, all utilities included, free street parking, and best of all, quiet neighborhood, landlord lives upstairs, very private. He was a full-time college student juggling night shifts at a nearby gas station, and the price seemed almost too good to be true. But it had pictures, a detailed description, and the landlord, someone named Walter G., had a verified profile on the rental site. It all looked legit. Alex messaged Walter right away and was surprised to get a response within the hour. The landlord's replies were short and to the point. "You can come see it today if you're available," he wrote. The tone was a little cold, but Alex figured maybe the guy was just old-fashioned or bad at texting. That afternoon, he took the 30-minute bus ride to the address Walter gave him. The house was on a quiet residential street lined with tall, leafless trees. It was early March, still cold and gray, with patches of snow clinging to the yards and sidewalks. The house itself was an older 2-story brick home, probably built in the 60s, with ivy growing along one side and narrow basement windows that peeked out just above ground level. Walter met him at the front door. He was an older man, maybe late 60s, tall but slightly hunched, with thin white hair and pale blue eyes. He didn't smile much, didn't offer a handshake, just opened the door and nodded for Alex to follow him around the side toward the basement entrance. The entryway was tucked behind a wooden gate near the driveway. The door opened into a small, clean hallway, freshly painted in a neutral beige. The apartment was simple but looked well kept. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, living room, 1 bathroom. New flooring, working appliances, decent lighting for a basement. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fresh drywall. Alex felt relieved. It was definitely the nicest place he'd seen in his price range. Walter gave a brief tour without saying much, just pointing here and there. "Kitchen's there. That's the bathroom. Back room stays locked." Alex glanced over and noticed a narrow wooden door at the end of the hallway. It didn't look like much, just a regular utility room door, but Walter paused and said flatly, "That's the furnace room, off limits." He didn't elaborate. Alex nodded politely, figuring maybe the landlord kept tools or maintenance stuff in there. Everyone has their quirks, he thought. At the end of the walkthrough, Walter handed him a printed lease agreement, asked for first and last month's rent in cash, and said he could move in by the weekend if he wanted it. Alex didn't hesitate. It was a solid deal in a tough market. By Sunday, he had moved in with just a couple bags, a mattress, and a folding table for a desk. The place was surprisingly quiet. No loud neighbors, no traffic, no thudding footsteps from upstairs. Walter kept to himself. Alex would occasionally hear him walking around above in the mornings or watching TV in the evenings, but it was always quiet by 10 p.m. It felt like he had the whole house to himself most of the time. But after a few days, strange things started to happen. At first, it was small, barely worth noticing. Around 3 a.m., Alex would wake up suddenly, like something had pulled him out of sleep. There was no sound at first, just a sense of being watched, a stillness that felt too still. Then one night, he heard a sound that made him sit upright in bed, a low, dragging noise from above, like furniture being pulled slowly across the floor. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. Long, heavy scrapes, stopping and starting again. He looked at the clock. 3:12 a.m. the next morning. He chalked it up to Walter moving something. Maybe the guy was a night owl. But it happened again the next night, and the next, always at the same time. Always that slow, deliberate dragging sound. He never heard footsteps leading up to it. Just silence, then the sound, then silence again. It started to unsettle him. The fifth night, he woke up not to dragging, but to something different. A scratching noise. Not from upstairs, this was from inside the apartment. It was faint but distinct. A scraping, scratching, almost like someone dragging their nails along metal. He got up and listened closely. The sound was coming from behind. The furnace room door. The one Walter told him never to open. Alex stood there in the hallway, half asleep, staring at the door. The scratching stopped the moment he got close. The silence was so sudden it felt like the apartment itself was holding its breath. Alex stood there for another minute, then backed away slowly. He went back to bed, telling himself it was probably a mouse or the furnace kicking on. But deep down, something didn't feel right. He started sleeping with the hallway light on after that. And every time he passed that door, he felt it watching him, like something behind it was listening, waiting. And he couldn't shake the thought, why would a landlord make a whole room off limits ... in your own home? The days went on, and Alex tried his best to settle into a routine, but something about the apartment wouldn't let him fully relax. He told himself it was just the adjustment period, new place, new sounds, but the uneasy feeling in his chest only grew heavier. Every night, it was the same thing. He'd go to sleep exhausted from classes and work, only to jolt awake sometime between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m., heart pounding for no reason. At first, it was the dragging sound from above, but now the sounds were starting to come from inside the apartment. What bothered Alex most was that he never saw Walter during the day, not even by accident. He heard the man's footsteps sometimes in the early morning, but he never ran into him outside or in the shared side yard. It was like Walter only existed when the house was asleep. It wasn't long before the furnace room started to dominate Alex's thoughts. Every time he passed it, he could feel a strange pressure behind the door, like something pressing against the wood from the inside. It wasn't just the memory of the scratching, though that would have been enough. It was something deeper, like the feeling you get when someone is standing behind you, breathing just out of reach. One evening, Alex got home after his shift and found something that made his stomach drop. The bathroom light was on. He never left it on. Worse, when he stepped inside, the mirror was completely fogged up, like someone had just taken a long, hot shower, but the room itself was freezing. Not a trace of steam in the air, and the tile floor was cold to the touch. He stood there staring into the cloudy mirror for a long time, listening. No sounds, no creaks, just silence. But his reflection didn't feel alone. The next morning he called Walter, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hey, just checking. You didn't come into the unit yesterday, right?" There was a pause on the other end. "I have a key, yes," Walter said slowly, "but I didn't go in. Why do you ask?" Alex hesitated. "No reason. Just wondering." Walter didn't say anything else. The call ended, and Alex stared at his phone for a long minute, trying to decide if he believed the man. He didn't. Not really. After that call, he started locking his bedroom door at night. Something about the way Walter answered, it didn't sit right. Like he wasn't surprised by the question. Then the whispers started. It began as faint murmurs, like someone speaking from far away, muffled and low. The first time Alex heard it, he was studying in his room when he noticed a soft hissing sound coming through the air vent above his desk. He paused his music and leaned closer. It was a voice. Not loud enough to understand, but definitely speaking. Then, as he strained to listen, he thought he heard it his name, whispered so quietly it barely registered. Alex ... He jumped back, heart slamming in his chest, and stared at the vent. There was no one on the other side, just the ventilation system that ran through the house. But after that, he couldn't unhear it. The whispers would return every couple of nights. sometimes from the vent, sometimes from behind the furnace room door. He tried recording it on his phone more than once, but every time he played it back, all he heard was static or distant hums, like the building itself was groaning. Alex didn't tell anyone at first. He was embarrassed. It all sounded too crazy. A locked room, whispers, fogged mirrors. But deep down, he knew something was wrong in that house. He started noticing little things out of place. A chair slightly pulled out from the table when he swore he'd pushed it in. A drawer half open. His toothbrush damp in the middle of the day. Once, he came home and found a spoon in the sink with something black and tar-like dried onto it. He didn't use that spoon. He hadn't even eaten at home that day. It was as if someone or something was moving through the apartment when he wasn't there. He became obsessed with the furnace room. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between the creaks and bumps of the house. Every sound made him flinch. He wanted to know what was behind that door, but something in his gut told him he didn't. One night, he almost opened it. He stood there with his hand on the doorknob for what felt like 10 minutes. The air felt heavier the closer he got. The knob was cold, far colder than the surrounding wall. He finally backed away and went back to his room, but he couldn't sleep after that. That night, he dreamt of a woman. She was soaking wet like she'd been dragged from a lake. Her skin was pale gray, almost bluish, and her eyes were solid black. She stood in front of the furnace room door, lips moving but no sound coming out. Her hand slowly reached toward him, and he woke up gasping. Drenched in sweat at this point, Alex knew he couldn't keep this to himself anymore. The apartment wasn't just unsettling, it was wrong. Something was watching him. Something was inside the walls, the vents, the shadows. And every night, it felt like it was getting closer. A week after the dream of the woman by the furnace room, Alex was running on edge. He barely slept, jumping at every creak and whisper the old house made. His schoolwork was slipping, and he started staying out late just to avoid going home too early. The apartment no longer felt like a place to live, it felt like a trap. The furnace room door stayed closed, but the sounds around it grew stranger by the night. Sometimes it was whispering. Sometimes it was a low rumble, almost like something was pacing behind the door. Every so often, he thought he heard something scraping down the hallway floor, slow and deliberate, but whenever he got up to check, the hallway was empty, cold, and quiet. One Thursday night, around midnight, Alex's friend Mark stopped by. They hadn't hung out in weeks, and Alex figured some company would help settle his nerves. They ordered pizza and played video games on the tiny living room TV. For a while, things actually felt normal again until around 2 a.m. when Mark decided to crash on the couch. Alex offered him an extra blanket and went to bed, feeling a little safer knowing someone else was in the apartment, but that safety didn't last. Sometime later, Alex woke to pounding on his bedroom door. He sat up, confused and half asleep, heart thudding. "Dude!" Mark was whispering harshly through the door. "Get up, something's in the furnace room." Alex froze. For a second, he didn't move, didn't speak. Mark knocked again, this time more urgently. "I heard it open. I swear I heard the latch click and then footsteps." Someone walked into the kitchen. Alex opened the door, and Mark was standing there, pale, holding his phone like a flashlight. His face wasn't just scared, it was confused, like he couldn't believe what he was saying. The two of them walked slowly down the hall, listening. The apartment was silent now. No footsteps, no scratching. But the air felt heavy, and the furnace room door, always tightly shut, was now slightly open. Not wide, just cracked a couple inches, enough to show complete blackness on the other side. Alex's stomach dropped. They stared at it for a long moment. Mark whispered, "That wasn't open before, right?" "No," Alex said. barely audible. I've never seen it open. He reached for the door slowly, fingers trembling. With a soft creak, he pushed it just enough to peek inside. At first, it looked like a normal utility room: pipes, wiring, a boiler in the corner. But then he saw the stairs. Narrow, old concrete steps leading down, deeper than they should. The ceiling was low, the space below pitch black like a root. Cellar or an unfinished basement. But Alex had seen the outside of the house. There was no lower level. That staircase shouldn't exist. A cold draft blew from the opening, and both of them stepped back instinctively. "I'm not going down there," Mark said flatly. Neither was Alex. He shut the door without another word, then dragged one of the kitchen chairs over and propped it under the knob. They didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Walter knocked. It was the first time Alex had seen him face to face since move-in day. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, eyes fixed on the kitchen chair pressed against the furnace room door. "You opened it," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was soft, almost disappointed. Alex didn't answer. Walter looked at him for a long time, then said, "Some doors shouldn't be opened," and walked away without. Another word after that, the atmosphere in the apartment changed. The dragging sound upstairs wasn't faint anymore. It was loud. Heavy. It would begin around 2:57 a.m. exactly, starting at the far end of the ceiling and slowly moving to a stop directly over Alex's bed. Then silence. But it wasn't peaceful. Silence. It was pressing, watching silence. He began having the dream again. The wet woman. Only this time she was closer. Her lips moved in slow, soundless sentences. One night, he could finally hear what she was saying. "He buried me down there." That was the night the hallway lights started flickering. Every time he passed the furnace room, they would dim slightly. Once, they turned off completely for 2 seconds, just long enough for him to hear a breath right behind his ear. He turned around fast. No one there. The hallway was empty. But when he looked back at the door, it was cracked open again. That night, he didn't bother trying to sleep. He stayed in the living room with every light on, texting Mark nonstop, terrified of what might happen if he closed his eyes. Then came the final warning. At around 4 a.m., Alex checked his phone for the time and found a new photo in his camera. Roll, he hadn't taken it. It was grainy and dark, but it was definitely a picture of him sleeping. From just a few feet away, his door had been locked, his window shut, but someone or something had been inside his room. The timestamp said 3:09 a.m. He stared at the photo until his fingers went numb. That was when he knew. Whatever was in the furnace room, it was already in the apartment. Alex moved out 3 days later. It wasn't planned. He left in the middle of the night with a duffel bag, his laptop, and whatever he could grab in 15 minutes. No goodbye, no notice to Walter. He just walked out the door and didn't look back. The photo in his phone, the one of him sleeping, had been the final line. That kind of violation of space and safety shattered any hope that what was happening could be explained away. He sent one last message to Mark, "Leaving tonight. I'll call when I'm out." Then he caught a late bus toward downtown and crashed on a friend's couch. The next day, he contacted the rental website to report what had happened, but Walter's listing was already gone, removed completely. No contact info. No record of his name. It was as if the ad had never existed. Over the next few weeks, Alex tried to forget. He got a temporary sublet and focused on school. He started sleeping better, no whispers, no photos, no wet footprints outside his door. But some nights, he still dreamed of the woman. Only now, she wasn't speaking. She was pointing. Behind him. Always behind him. He told himself it was just trauma, that his brain was working through everything, but a part of him, deep down, Wondered if something had followed him. That maybe once you let it in, it didn't just go away. A month later, Mark called him sounding shaken. He'd gone back to the neighborhood out of curiosity, planning to show a friend the creepy house. But the house was gone, not just empty gone. In its place was a dirt lot surrounded by orange construction fencing. When he asked around, one of the neighbors said the place had been demolished the week before. The old man finally left. The neighbor had said he was strange, lived alone for years. Heard his wife died down there accident or something. Basement flooded. Real bad story. That detail sent a chill through Alex. He'd never mentioned the dream woman to Mark. Never talked about the water. He didn't have to. But the worst part came a few days later. Alex was scrolling online late one night trying to distract himself when he saw a Reddit post on a local housing thread. It was titled, "Anyone else rent from Walter G?" His stomach turned. The post was from a woman who said she'd rented a basement apartment in Scarborough back in 2017. She described the exact same things. Weird noises, cold air from the vents, a locked room the landlord warned her never to enter. But her story ended with something Alex hadn't expected. She said her cat had vanished, just disappeared one night. She found the door to the furnace room open the next morning. She moved out a week later, convinced something was in there. She even had a blurry photo of the basement hallway. It was unmistakable. It was his hallway. The replies on the post piled up. Other people chimed in, each with eerily similar stories, different neighborhoods, different houses, but always the same pattern. Basement suite, locked room, strange landlord named Walter G. Some had stayed for weeks. Some had left after only a night. But all of them remembered one thing clearly. Walter never aged. In every description, he looked the same. Tall, pale, white hair, cold eyes. Like he was just passing through different houses, leaving something behind each time. Alex didn't sleep that night. His thoughts kept spiraling. If Walter wasn't just some creepy landlord, then what was he? And what was behind that door? He began to wonder if Walter had ever been a real person at all. Maybe he was just a mask for something else something. Older, something that moved from place to place, feeding off whoever got too close. And maybe that locked door wasn't hiding anything. Maybe it was keeping it in. The next morning, Alex got a call from an unknown number. He let it go to voicemail, but when he checked it, his heart nearly stopped. There was no voice, no breathing, just silence until the last 3 seconds. A soft dragging sound, long, slow, then a click. The sound of a door closing. He stared at his phone in disbelief, then deleted the message without listening again. But something in the background of that recording still echoed in his mind. The low sound of water, moving water, like a flooded room. For weeks after, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he'd brought something back with him. He started locking every door behind him, covering vents, avoiding mirrors at night. But the dreams came back. The woman with black eyes. Only this time she was no longer pointing. She was standing in his doorway, silent, watching, waiting. It's been over a year now. And Alex doesn't rent basements anymore. He doesn't answer unknown numbers. And he never, ever stays in a place where there's a locked door he's not allowed to open. Because sometimes, if you open the wrong door, you don't just find something waiting on the other side. Sometimes, it finds you.